I was talking to a friend the other day who proudly announced he'd gone plant-based. I was genuinely curious, so I asked him what his go-to meal was. He grinned and pointed to the lunch he was eating. A massive basket of French fries, a side of onion rings, and a large soda. Technically, he said with a wink, it's all made from plants. And he's not wrong. But that moment perfectly captures why the entire conversation around diet has become so incredibly confusing. His plate was technically plant-based, but it was also a nutritional wasteland of processed carbs, industrial oils, and sugar. It made me realize that the word itself has been stretched to mean everything and nothing. It's used to sell both vibrant health and the same old junk food in a different package. What the actual science says is best, however, has nothing to do with that basket of fries. Yeah, that story, it really hits home how confusing that term plant-based has become, doesn't it? It can mean, well, anything from a super healthy salad to, like you said, a pile of fries. So for this deep dive, we really want to cut through that confusion. Let's figure out what whole food plant-based actually means. Not just for us, for our health, but, for the planet too. And honestly, how society is kind of wrestling with this whole shift. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. And we're going to look at it from a few angles, right? Like how the global medical community is starting to see this not just as a lifestyle thing, but almost as a prescription. And then there's the huge picture, the agricultural policies, climate change. It's all connected to what's on your plate. And yeah, the human side, why do we eat what we eat? There are some surprising reasons behind it all. We'll definitely unpack that.
Okay, let's dive into the health side first then.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned this evolving consensus in the medical world. It sounds like whole food, plant-based diets are moving beyond just being a good idea to becoming a real tool against chronic diseases, especially, in places dealing with massive healthcare costs from things like heart disease, diabetes, obesity.
Absolutely. The evidence, particularly around weight management, is becoming really hard to ignore. Study after study shows that folks following vegetarian patterns generally have lower rates of overweight and obesity compared to omnivores. There was this one large study, I think it was in Taiwan, with almost 50,000 adults. They found the percentage of people with a BMI over 27, which, is considered obese in some Asian populations. Slightly different threshold, maybe. It was significantly lower for vegetarians. Like 10.9% compared to 15.4% for non-vegetarians. That's a noticeable difference.
Wow. Okay. So a clear difference there.
Yeah. But get this, what was even more striking was the long-term effect. For every single year someone stuck to a vegan diet, their risk of obesity dropped by 7%.
7% per year.
Per year. It suggests this isn't just a quick fix. It's a cumulative benefit. It builds over time. And when you think about how much poor diet contributes to non-communicable diseases, NCDs, we're talking diabetes, heart disease, obesity. Yeah. These account for, nearly 3/4 of global deaths?
74%. Yeah, it's staggering.
Right. So the potential impact of shifting diets on a large scale, it's massive. It really turns eating into a major public health issue, not just personal choice.
Okay, so if the science is stacking up like that, showing these clear benefits for really serious diseases, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why isn't my doctor handing me a prescription for kale and lentils alongside, whatever else? Why isn't this the first thing they try?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it really points to a pretty big gap in how doctors are trained. It sounds surprising, but a lot of medical schools just don't spend much time teaching the practical clinical side of nutrition science.
Really? Even now?
Even now. It's often seen as, secondary, which is a huge oversight when you consider diet as fundamental, like the cornerstone for preventing and managing most of those NCDs we just talked about. Doctors learn to treat diseases, absolutely, but often they're not fully equipped to use diet as a primary prevention tool.
So what's being done about that? Are things changing?
Thankfully, yes. There are some really interesting ideas bubbling up. Some places, like the University of Cambridge, are trying out this vertical spiral curriculum.
Vertical spiral? What does that mean?
It means instead of just one nutrition course crammed in somewhere, they weave it in every year across different specialties. So when you're studying cardiology, you learn how diet affects the heart. Endocrinology, you learn how it impacts diabetes. Pediatrics, early life nutrition, you see.
Ah, okay. So it becomes part of everything, not just a separate topic.
Exactly. It makes it relevant constantly. And then there's the practical stuff. Imagine medical students actually taking cooking classes, learning how to make healthy plant-based meals.
That sounds fun, actually.
Yeah.
But practical, too.
Very practical. It helps them understand the food itself, the nutritional value, how easy or hard it might be for a patient. It builds their confidence, so they can give real actionable advice, not just eat better. In the UK, the Association for Nutrition has even set out 13 core nutrition skills all medical students should have, covering the science, how to assess patients, how to advise them. The goal is a common standard, making nutrition a core medical skill.
That all sounds incredibly positive, a real shift in thinking for future doctors.
Yeah.
But okay, even if the doctor is clued up on nutrition, getting these whole food plant-based approaches rolled out to everyone, that feels like a whole other challenge, right? It's not just about the prescription pad.
Oh, absolutely. That's where we hit the real-world implementation hurdles. If you look at the research on, say, plant-based diets for weight loss interventions, there are some limitations. A lot of studies don't have a clear theoretical basis spelled out. Like, what psychological or behavioral theory are they using to get people to change?
Why does that matter?
Because it makes it really hard to compare studies. If one study focuses on self-efficacy and another uses habit formation theory, and they don't explain it well, how do you know what really worked? It muddies the water when building the evidence.
Okay, makes sense.
What else? Well, a lot of the successful programs we do have rely heavily on group meetings, weekly sessions, support groups, that kind of thing. And those can work great for the people who show up, but they're expensive and time-consuming. You can't easily scale that up to reach millions of people.
Right. Not practical for a massive public health push.
Exactly. So there's a huge need for research into remote delivery using websites, apps, smartphones, even just text messages. Can we deliver effective, personalized advice that way? Can we reach more people more affordably? That's a really critical area.
And are there specific groups where this gets even trickier?
Yeah, actually. There's this thing called the obesity paradox in older adults.
What now? Caradoc.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. In older folks, losing weight is often linked to fewer illnesses, lower morbidity, which makes sense. But weirdly, it's also sometimes linked to higher mortality, a greater risk of dying.
Wait, losing weight is linked to higher risk of dying in older people. Why?
Well, the theories are complex. It might be that the weight loss is a symptom of an underlying illness already, or maybe it involves losing muscle mass sarcopenia, which is bad for older adults. The point is, we have almost no research on how plant-based diets specifically fit into this picture for older people. Does a WFPB approach mitigate that risk? Does the nutrient density help? We just don't know yet. It's a big gap in our understanding for that specific population.
Huh. Okay, so it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution, especially across different age groups.
Precisely. Nuance is key.
So summing up this health part then, it seems like the medical world is definitely waking up to the power of whole food, plant-based eating. The evidence is strong, but making it a widespread reality means fixing the education gap for doctors and figuring out how to deliver these interventions effectively and equitably to the whole population. Lots of work still to do there.
That's a perfect summary. Systemic change is needed on multiple fronts.
All right, let's broaden the lens now, because this isn't just about our individual bodies. The connection between our plates and the planet, well, it's becoming impossible to ignore, isn't it? Turns out what's good for us might be absolutely critical for Earth's health.
Critically important, yes. The environmental urgency is, frankly, staring us in the face. We're seeing climate change accelerate, more intense heat waves, droughts becoming more common, weird weather patterns messing with agriculture. All of this threatens food security globally. And the irony is, our food system itself is a massive driver of that climate change. A huge chunk of greenhouse gas emissions comes from producing food.
So it's like a feedback loop almost.
Exactly. We need to feed, an estimated 10 billion people by 2050? And we have to figure out how to do that sustainably without completely wrecking the planet. It's a monumental challenge.
And where do our individual food choices fit into that huge picture?
They're actually crucial. As consumers, your choices essentially signal demand. They orient production, as some researchers put it, and the potential impact is enormous. There's research suggesting that if we globally halved red meat consumption and shifted towards mostly plant-based diets, we could cut the food sector's greenhouse gas emissions by something like 70% by 2050.
70%, that's huge.
It's transformative. And it wouldn't just help the climate, it would likely reduce food shortages too. It tackles multiple crises at once. It's a really powerful lever we can pull.
Okay, that's the climate angle, which gets a lot of attention. But you hinted before there's more to it, right? The impact on actual nature, on biodiversity.
Yes, and this is where it gets really stark, and maybe less discussed than emissions. Animal agriculture, particularly livestock production, is identified as the single largest driver of habitat loss worldwide.
The single largest. More than logging or development?
More than logging, more than urban sprawl when you look at the sheer land area involved globally. And it's increasing fastest in tropical countries, which are biodiversity hotspots. Think about the Amazon again. Over 3/4, 75% of the deforested land there has been turned into pasture for cattle or land to grow feed, like soy, mostly for livestock.
So we're literally replacing rainforests with cows and animal feed.
Pretty much. And that obviously wipes out countless species and destroys ecosystems that are vital for, soaking up carbon. Then on top of habitat loss, you have the emissions. We talked about methane, CH4, from, cow burps mainly, and nitrous oxide, N2O, from fertilizers and manure. And these aren't trivial gases. Methane especially is incredibly potent in the short term. It traps way more heat than CO2, molecule for molecule, over, say, a 20-year period.
Right, I've heard that. It's like a super warmer.
Exactly. And agriculture is responsible for a huge chunk of global emissions of both N2O, maybe 70%, and methane, around 40%.
And it doesn't stop there, does it? Other impacts.
No, it keeps going. You get massive soil erosion from overgrazing and intensive feed cropping. You get water pollution, huge amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus from manure and fertilizer runoff getting into rivers and oceans, causing algal blooms and dead zones. You even see impacts up the food chain, declines in top predators because their prey base shrinks, or declines in wild herbivores competing with livestock. It throws whole ecosystems out of whack.
Is there data that shows this clearly? Like visually?
Yeah, some really powerful maps exist. They overlay areas with high density of ruminants, cattle, sheep, goats onto maps showing species richness for birds, mammals, amphibians. And the correlation is just unavoidable. Where you see lots of livestock, you almost always see fewer wild species. It's a direct visual link between animal agriculture and biodiversity loss.
Wow. But can we put some numbers on the carbon footprint difference?
Yeah.
You hear beef is bad, but how bad compared to, say, chicken or beans?
Okay, let's break it down. Extensive beef, like grass-fed across large areas, can have a footprint close to 60 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of meat produced. 60.
60 kilos of CO2e for 1 kilo of beef.
Roughly, yeah. Even intensive beef from feedlots is still high, maybe 20 to 25 kilos. Now, compare that. Pork is around 5 kilos. Poultry, like chicken, is about 4 kilos. Eggs are roughly 3 kilos.
Okay, already a huge drop from beef.
Massive drop. But then look at pulses, beans, peas, lentils, soy. Their footprint is less than 1 kilogram, often much less, almost negligible in comparison.
That difference is, well, it's incredibly stark, isn't it? Less than 1 kilogram versus up to 60 kilograms.
It really highlights the disproportionate impact of different food choices on the climate. The numbers speak for themselves.
So given all that, the habitat loss, the emissions, the pollution, the sheer inefficiency, what are the solutions? How do we fundamentally change how we produce food?
Well, it has to be multi-pronged, right? Reducing demand for animal products, especially red meat, is obviously key. Ideally shifting towards that 90% plant-based figure we mentioned. But also, within animal agriculture itself, there's a push to replace less efficient ruminants like cattle with more efficient monogastrics, pigs, and poultry, or integrated aquaculture, fish farming. They convert feed to protein much more effectively.
So fewer cows, maybe more chickens or fish, alongside way more plants.
That's part of the picture, yeah. But it's also about how we farm. We need to make away from these huge, intensive single crop or single animal systems that rely heavily on fossil fuels and external inputs. The goal is to move towards more diverse, integrated systems that mimic natural ecosystems. Think about nutrient cycling within the farm, not just importing fertilizer and exporting waste.
You mentioned something like integrated agriculture aquaculture, IAA.
Yes. These are amazing traditional systems, especially from Asia. Basically, waste from one part becomes food for another, like using crop residues or animal manure to fertilize fish ponds. The fish then thrive, and you get protein production in a really small space. Remember those land figures? Fish need maybe 1-2 square meters per kilo. Beef needs nearly 70. It's incredibly land efficient.
Wow. And other integrated systems, like mixing crops.
Absolutely. Agroecology, polyculture, growing multiple crops together, maybe integrating animals too. These systems often have higher total yields than monocultures. They naturally reduce pests and weeds because of the diversity. They use water and nutrients more efficiently because different plants have different needs and root depths. And crucially, they're often more resilient to climate shocks like droughts or floods because diversity spreads the risk.
So why aren't we doing this everywhere? It sounds way better.
Well, the barriers are significant. Small farmers using these methods often lack access to good markets for their diverse products. Land tenure can be insecure. There's often little government support, like access to credit or relevant research. And frankly, there are powerful vested interests. Large agribusinesses, chemical companies that benefit from the current industrial monoculture system, they have a lot of influence.
Right. The status quo has momentum. What about the soil itself? Can better farming help store carbon?
Yes, huge potential there. Conventional farming, especially all the tilling, has released massive amounts of carbon from soils into the atmosphere over centuries. Practices like no-till or conservation tillage, where you disturb the soil much less, help rebuild soil structure and trap carbon. Think of it like putting carbon back in the bank.
And taking land out of farming.
That can be even more powerful in some cases. Restoring native ecosystems, wetlands, forests, peat bogs on former agricultural land can sequester enormous amounts of carbon. These natural habitats are super carbon rich. Estimates vary, but globally, agricultural soils might be able to sequester somewhere between, say, 0.4 and 1.2 gigatons of carbon per year.
How much is that in context?
It's potentially enough to offset maybe 10% of current human emissions from fossil fuels. So it's significant. Not a silver bullet for climate change, but a really important piece of the puzzle.
Although there's debate about how long soils can keep soaking it up, right?
Yeah, there's discussion about saturation points. But the immediate potential is definitely there and worth pursuing aggressively.
Okay, this connects to something you mentioned earlier, the money, the subsidies.
Yeah.
How does government spending play into all this? Is it helping or hindering this shift?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. And right now it's mostly hindering, massively hindering. Governments globally spend over $500 billion a year supporting agriculture. That's projected to hit almost $1.8 trillion by 2030.
$1 trillion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker. An estimated 87% of that money currently goes to subsidies that are either distorting prices, harming nature, or damaging public health, or all three.
87%. So only 13% isn't actively harmful.
Or less. Only about 5% is considered actively green, supporting environmental benefits, and that's mostly in richer countries. These harmful subsidies often directly incentivize the very things we know are bad, like expanding agriculture into forests. You mentioned Brazil's rural credit system earlier. It might not explicitly say, go cut down trees, but by making credit cheaper for farmers in high deforestation areas, it effectively encourages expansion and pressure on the forest frontier.
It's unfair too, you said.
Hugely unfair. The benefits flow overwhelmingly to large, wealthy landowners and big agricultural corporations, not smallholders or local communities. It locks in inequality.
But there's hope for change here. You mentioned an international agreement.
Yes, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It's a really big deal. Countries agreed to a Target 18 specifically to identify and redirect or eliminate subsidies harmful to biodiversity by 2030, reducing them by at least $500 billion per year.
$500 billion a year shifted away from harmful subsidies. That's enormous potential.
It's a massive opportunity. Imagine repurposing that money. You could use it for payments for ecosystem services, paying farmers directly to adopt regenerative practices, protect waterways, plant trees. You could fund insurance or credit programs tied to meeting environmental standards, support the development of traceability systems so we know products aren't coming from deforested land.
So rewarding the good stuff instead of subsidizing the bad.
Exactly. But, and this is important, any transition needs safety nets, social policies to support farmers and communities who might be negatively affected by subsidy shifts. It has to be a just transition.
Okay, so wrapping up the environmental side. The science is crystal clear. Shifting diets towards plants, backed by smarter farming practices, and crucially, redirecting those huge subsidy flows. It's not just an option for planetary health, it feels like the essential path forward.
I think that's a fair assessment. The potential benefits across climate, biodiversity, and food security are just immense.
Right. We've laid out the health case, the planetary case. Both seem incredibly strong, which brings us back to that initial question. If it's so good for us and good for the earth, why isn't everyone already eating whole food, plant-based? This is where we get into the human element, isn't it? The psychology, the culture, the habits.
Precisely. And this is where it gets really complex and honestly quite fascinating because the barriers are real and deeply rooted. Think about culture and religion first. Food isn't just fuel, it's memory, it's celebration, it's identity. You mentioned the Thanksgiving turkey. That's a powerful cultural anchor for many. Giving that up feels like giving up part of the tradition, part of belonging. Religious beliefs are also deeply intertwined. Some encourage meat consumption, others, like Jainism or forms of Hinduism and Buddhism, champion vegetarianism for ethical reasons, nonviolence. These aren't just preferences, they're core values.
Yeah, you can't just dismiss that. It's part of who people are.
Exactly. Then there's just the sheer perceived effort. If you've grown up on a standard meat and two veg kind of diet, switching feels like work. Learning new recipes, finding new ingredients, maybe spending more time cooking, it can seem daunting. The familiar is just easier.
The path of least resistance.
Right. And that Eat Globescan report you mentioned earlier, it surveyed thousands of people worldwide. What came up again and again? Cost, taste, and habit.
The big three.
The big three. People worry it'll be expensive, they worry it won't taste as good, and they're just used to eating what they eat. Those are powerful forces keeping people stuck in existing patterns.
And it goes even deeper than that, doesn't it? It gets tangled up with identity politics almost. What we eat, signaling something about our worldview.
Oh, absolutely. This is where the jail-tan framework you brought up earlier becomes really relevant. Just to recap, GLL values green, alternative, libertarian, often align with environmentalism, social justice, openness to change. TAN values, traditional, authoritarian, nationalist, tend to emphasize social order, national identity, tradition.
And food fits into this how?
Food becomes a symbol. Eating plant-based can signal alignment with GAL values, environmental concern, maybe animal welfare, progressiveness. Eating lots of meat, conversely, can be a way to signal traditional values. Align it with pan worldviews, strength, perhaps resisting elitist trends, sticking to national culinary traditions.
The whole real men eat meat trope fits in here, right?
Perfectly. It ties meat eating directly to traditional concepts of masculinity, dominance, power, virility. Vegetarianism historically has sometimes been feminized or seen as weak, even deviant from that norm. This idea of a singular masculinity that values domination over nature fits snugly with a worldview that might be resistant to environmental messages.
So people with GAL values are more likely to eat plant-based.
The research strongly suggests that yes, their ethical motivations, caring about animals, the environment, are powerful drivers, but it's not uniform everywhere. In places like Sweden, with higher incomes and more egalitarian values, ideology seems to translate more directly into food choices. But in Italy or Mexico, where culinary traditions are incredibly strong and there are bigger income gaps, affordability is key. Your ideology might push you towards plant-based, but if you can't afford it, or if it clashes too strongly with cultural norms, it's much harder to act on it.
That makes sense. What about the disconnect between industry and academia you mentioned?
Yeah, that's interesting. Industry often focuses marketing on health, price, taste, the immediate drivers for most consumers. Academics often highlight the ethical drivers, environment, animal welfare. It means they might be talking past each other sometimes. But smart companies do adapt. They know taste is often the gateway. Like maybe you try oat milk just because you like the taste in your coffee, not for ethical reasons. But once you've adopted that one plant-based habit, maybe you become more open to others. It can be a starting point.
A foot in the door.
Exactly. And affordability is always there. Even for higher income people who could afford plant-based, some might stick with meat because it still signals status or success in their social circles, aligning with those TAN values again. And for lower income groups, it's often not just perception, the cost barrier is very real.
Okay, so culture, habits, cost, taste, identity, politics. It's a complex web holding dietary patterns in place. Which brings us to, how do we actually change behavior? This sounds like a job for behavioral economics. How can policies or subtle nudges help shift things without feeling like a mandate?
This is where things get really practical and potentially very effective. Behavioral economics teaches us that people aren't perfectly rational robots. We take shortcuts, we're influenced by how choices are presented, we have limited attention.
We're human, basically.
Exactly. So policies can be designed to work with that human nature, making the healthy, sustainable choice the easy, default, or attractive option. Lots of governments have units, like the UK's Nudge Unit, specifically applying these ideas.
So what kinds of policies are we talking about?
Think of it as a spectrum. On the lighter end, you have decision support. This is about giving people information and tools, but not forcing their hand. So things like public information campaigns, Denmark's 6 a day for fruit and veg, they raise awareness, even if they don't change behavior overnight. Training chefs and canteens to make tasty plant-based meals, providing clear nutrition labels, maybe even restricting ads for unhealthy food to kids, like several European countries do.
Okay, information and education. What's next?
Then you have decision steering. This is where nudges and financial incentives come in, intervening a bit more strongly. Nudges are subtle changes to the environment. Remember that study where just moving veggie burgers to the meat aisle boosted sales by 30%?
Yeah, without even forcing anything.
Exactly. That's choice architecture. Or simply providing info and recipes at the point of sale in a supermarket that was shown to reduce meat purchases too. Financial incentives are more direct. Positive ones are like subsidies or vouchers, the UK's Healthy Start vouchers for fruit veg for low-income families, or doctors prescribing food vouchers, making the healthy choice cheaper.
And negative incentive, taxes.
Taxes, yeah. Right now, often plant-based milks are taxed higher than cow's milk in Europe, which seems backwards. The recommendation is flip that. Minimal or zero VAT on healthy plant-based staples and maybe a higher tax on animal products to reflect their environmental and health costs. Germany estimated raising the meat tax could cut consumption by up to 10%.
So making the less sustainable choice more expensive.
Reflecting its true cost, essentially. And finally, at the strongest end, you have decision restriction. Mandatory rules, basically. Things like setting minimum nutritional standards for school lunches, which many countries do, or even mandating plant-based options. Portugal legally requires public canteens, schools, hospitals to offer a vegan option every day. France requires schools to have a meat-free day each week.
Wow, that's quite direct. A legal requirement.
It is. These have the biggest impact, usually, but also tend to face the most public resistance because they limit choice more explicitly. Think of the debates around mandatory veggie days.
Right, people don't like being told what to eat.
Generally not, so it's often about finding the right balance of interventions, information, nudges, incentives, and maybe some targeted regulations where appropriate.
It really paints a picture of change happening on so many levels, doesn't it? From the doctor's office to the farm to the supermarket aisle to government policy.
It really does. It shows that shifting towards a truly beneficial plant-based future isn't just about individual willpower. It requires this careful mix of medical understanding, economic shifts, policy innovation, and a really smart understanding of human psychology and culture. It's never just about the food itself, but the whole complex system that gets it onto our plates.
And that whole system, as we've explored today, is far more complicated, interconnected, and honestly more fascinating than just looking at a basket of fries would ever lead you to believe.